Today we are going to do the full DPS guide for hunters in phase 1 in Season of Discovery. I'm going to go over everything you need to know to increase your damage, including what pets to use, what consumables to use, what rotation to use and talents, as well as tips and tricks for every single boss in the raid. This guide will not go over leveling tips and it won't go super in depth on melee weaving. I have a guide coming out on that very soon, as well as Veramos has a guide out on that already. So you can check that out. And from there, let's get right into it. The first spec you're going to want to look at, and what almost every single hunter this phase is going to want to run, is going to be the Beast Mastery spec. This is because it is so much easier to do good damage. Your pet does kind of do a lot of your damage, but it is a lot easier than the Marksman build, which requires you to have a very good gear, very fast kill times, and as well, it requires a little bit more of a rotation. I have a full guide on that on the channel. But this is the build you will run. You have improved aspect of the Hawk, then it doesn't matter what your next 5 points are. You can get improved revive pet and endurance training. These are my favorites because your pet will die less often, or if it does, you can res it. Then unleash fury for 20% extra pet damage and 1 point into ferocity for your pet's crit. Now on top of that, the runes we will run are always going to be Heart of the Lion. This is going to be in your chest slot. Then we have Beast Mastery. This is the big one for a BM hunter, and Flanking Strike. So we're running Flanking Strike 90% of the time, and that's because you should be melee weaving. We'll get more into that later in the video, but if you are playing Beast Mastery on a hunter, you almost always should be melee weaving unless you have two one-handed weapons. If you are not going to melee weave, and that is totally fine, then you should run the Kill Command rune. If you're running the Kill Command rune, this does require you to have a raptor or cat pet, but if you are not running melee weave or a raptor or cat pet and you're still running something like a wind serpent, then you can just use the sniper training rune. The alternative spec is to play Marksman, and that is if you have better gear or you just want a more complex rotation. In this spec, you will get efficiency for the mana reduction on your cost, go down into lethal shots for extra crit, then you grab aim shot. We need aim shot for this spec. It is very, very useful. And then we are going to go back into the Beast Mastery tree to grab improved aspect of the Hawk. Now, instead, our runes are different this time. We are always, if we can, running Master Marksman, but if you're the only hunter in the raid, you have to run Heart of the Lion, which is bringing the aspect of the lion buff. For your hand slot, you are going to run Chimera Shot. This is what we are using, and then again, Flanking Strike. Ideally, you are melee weaving still. If not, there's two options, the same ones, Kill Command and Sniper Training. Serpent Spread is pretty much useless. It just depends on what you're doing. If you're using Sniper Training and you're not going to be melee weaving at all, then you need to be in a very, very good position because you don't want to move, and having that extra 10% crit will be vital. And as for hunter pets, what you want to use, or my favorite choice, and I think everyone should use this for the raids unless they are marksmen, is going to be a wind serpent. And the wind serpent that you want to get, an easy one, is called Wasti Pawnee. It is a rare spawn down here in the Barrens. It is a red wind serpent. You can also get a white wind serpent down in Thousand Needles. You just need to make sure that your pet has Lightning Breath rank 3. But if you're not running that, you want a 2.0 attack speed cat. That is a slow attack speed cat because we are going to be using Flanking Strike. And one of the nice ones is a Ghost Saber, or you can just go and get a raptor from something like Duratar and level it up. They also have the same ability. They can learn both claw and bite. These are very, very strong. They're all about the same damage, but Wasti Pawnee can be a lot better for the second boss in the raid, and it is better in PvP just from adding that range. So I would argue that Beast Mastery hunters should always go with Wasti Pawnee, and you'll probably see everyone on overall damage using the wind serpents. And then if you are a marksman, you can switch between the two. I would use a cat or raptor. And the important consumables that you need are going to be first and foremost scrolls. And it's not because the scroll of agility gives you 9 agility instead of actually using a elixir that gives you 8 agility. It's because you can also use these on your pet. So you want a scroll of agility and a scroll of strength. These are both kind of expensive, so you can use the weaker versions of these if you are going to be using them just on your pets, and use the elixirs on yourself. But make sure that you are putting scrolls up on your pet to increase your pet's damage, and make sure that it has things like Blessing of Might and Mark of the Wild, again, to increase their damage. From there, you also want to get the Black Fathom Sharpening Stones, but only if you are either dual wielding or you don't have a druid in your group and you're melee weaving, because you won't have Wild Strikes or Wind Fury. If you don't have that, then just throw on the Black Fathom Sharpening Stone. Then the other very useful things to have is a Minor Recombobulator. This is an extra mana potion, which can be huge in a lot of fights. I always use mana pots. Mana pots in general, it doesn't have to be the most expensive ones, but definitely stock up on these. You'll use them almost every fight. Heavy Dynamite, which you need to actually weave into your rotation. You can't just throw it willy-nilly, but I will talk about that as we talk about clipping. And Elixirs of Wisdom. This is going to increase your intellect as well, which makes it so you can use more abilities. Then the major world buff that you want is going to be the Boon of the Black Fathom. Super easy to get. The big thing from this is not only getting 2% crit and 20 attack power, but it is getting that 20% movement speed, which makes melee weaving so much easier and increases your DPS. Okay, let's talk about the rotation. As a Beast Mastery Hunter, the rotation is very simple if you are not melee weaving. And I would always suggest that you do melee weave. But if you're not, the rotation is to use multi-shot. And I would open with multi-shot every time because it hits harder than any of your other abilities. So you want to put it on cooldown as fast as possible. So multi-shot into an auto shot, into a Serpent Sting, and then Arcane Shot. That is literally it. You're going to use those three abilities. That's all you really have. It's multi-shot, Serpent Sting, keep it up, then Arcane Shot, and just wait for it. Multi-shot in Classic is a cast, so just be aware it can clip your shots. And what clipping is basically whenever an auto shot is starting to cast, because it is not instantly shot out, you can see your character cocking the gun or pulling back the bow. Then if you move or cast something else, it'll actually reset that swing timer and it'll push you back from using that auto shot, which is a ton of your damage. Things that reset this, things that can clip your abilities and clip your auto shots are multi-shot, of course, like I mentioned. Also, Heavy Dynamite. If you're casting a dynamite, it will interrupt your cast. If you use a potion like a health potion or a mana potion, it will also interrupt your cast. So don't do that as you start casting an auto shot. And as well, of course, movement. Movement is the major one, especially when we are melee weaving. Whenever you move, it resets that swing. So you always want to move right after you cast an auto shot. That also means after an auto shot goes out, you want to use things like multi-shot. So if you're moving into melee weave, as soon as you move back into position, you will cast an auto shot first and then a multi-shot. Now, if you are melee weaving, the rotation will always be fit a melee in between any of your two shots. What I mean by this is you will open with a multi-shot and then the auto shot will go out. You have to wait for that auto shot. If you start moving instantly, you won't shoot that second shot. Then as you're running in, you could throw a instant cast Serpent Sting. When you get into the target, you will use a Raptor Strike macro that will have Raptor Strike and Flanking Strike, and it will also hit with a melee if you can. Then you will move out and instantly use auto shot again. Then you will use an Arcane Shot into one more auto shot, then run back in and melee again, rinse and repeat. But this time when you run out, you will use multi-shot. Again, your priority is always going to be to use multi-shot, then keep Serpent Sting up, then Arcane Shot. And actually, if you are melee weaving, it is going to be multi-shot, auto shot, and focus on melees. If you even just do those and don't Arcane Shot because it is very inefficient mana-wise, then you are going to do just fine. If you are a Marksman Hunter and want to know your rotation, then I'm actually just going to send you to my Marksman Hunter guide so this guide doesn't get too long, but the rotation is a little bit more complex, definitely more complex when you add in melee weaving, but that will be in my melee weave guide. So Marksman Hunters just use a normal rotation that is in that guide, but this is the full BM rotation. Now that we know everything we need, let's look at the actual bosses in BFD and talk about everything you can do to increase your DPS within the raid. Okay, so for the first boss, Baron Aquinas, you need to have your pet on the final platform if you even want your pet to attack the boss. This means before you actually even start the last kind of like water elemental, you want to actually set your pet up for a good position. So I set my pet up here. I haven't unbooned yet, but I set my pet up so that right as soon as we can start attacking the boss, it is attacking him. Or if you don't pre-position your pet, and that's totally fine, what you need to do is summon your pet when you are running towards the boss. So I'm going to show you that here. As you're running towards the boss, the second you land on the platform, summon your pet. Do not summon your pet while you are in the air. If you do this, you will actually not even use your pet. Now, you saw me use a heavy dynamite right there. It was right after an auto shot went off. The heavy dynamite wants to be cast either while you're moving or in between an auto shot. So that is the best position to or time to use your heavy dynamite. Now also for this boss, you definitely want to be melee weaving. It is a DPS increase, but if you are not melee weaving, you can be positioned anywhere. Just make sure you don't get knocked off. The second boss, Gamura, you can do a little bit of extra damage by placing a trap early on, an immolation trap, because he takes full damage from spells, but he doesn't take damage from any sort of melees while he has his shield up. This is why we're also actually going to focus on keeping up either Serpent Sting, well, not either, but keep up Serpent Sting, as well as use Arcane Shot on rotation. This is the boss, which is the reason why we actually want the Wind Serpent pet, and why it's going to be very hard to out-parse what we had beforehand when we had Scorpion pets, because the Giga Busted Scorpions did crazy damage to him while he had his shield. As soon as you break the shield, then you want to start pumping the boss. I would stay far away from the boss early on to not lose any of your world buffs and die, and then start melee weaving a little bit later. You don't need to melee weave this boss. You actually could use sniper training on this boss instead, but I choose to melee weave. It is still, again, not something you absolutely need to do, and I would ignore the Grinches in this raid. It's kind of a meme, but this was my most recent raid, so I'm just showing you guys what happened. Now for Lady Cerberus, make sure you are always in position early so you can open up with a multi-shot as soon as the pull actually happens. Then if you want to melee weave, I would suggest doing it. It's always nice. Make sure that you use a dynamite on this boss, and always prioritize your multi-shots. You always want to prioritize multi-shot, because multi-shot will hit both of the targets and do extra damage. From there, the big thing to focus on is making sure your pet doesn't get frozen. If your pet gets frozen, you lose a ton of damage. So whenever she does the freezing arrow on the ground, never actually trust your tank to move the pet itself. I would always recall my pet to myself and then send my pet again. Tanks have a tendency to not move the boss enough, so your pets almost always get frozen, but they can be dispelled. Ask your priest nicely and say, please make sure you dispel my pet, and tell them your pet's name as soon as it happens on the boss. If they are fast at it, you will lose 0 uptime. So that is the way to actually help out, is just make sure that your pet does a ton of damage for you. Illahast is annoying because to actually do more damage to this boss, you would prefer if your group did less damage, meaning you had a longer uptime of actually being able to pump him when he's not basically immuning in between the phases. But this is just kind of an issue we're all gonna have to deal with. The real way to pump this boss is do all of your damage as fast as you can, and then as soon as the intermissions start, just make sure you don't get hit by any of the ads. But what I would do is manually turn off your pet's abilities during this, because you want your pets to be pooling focus, so as soon as the boss is vulnerable again, you can use all of your abilities again. So just manually turn off your abilities, then manually turn them back on as soon as you can start fighting the boss again. If you have a perfect timer, you can actually perfectly time a auto shot into a multi-shot, or a multi-shot into an auto shot as soon as the phase is ending, and just not worry about taking a little bit of damage at the end of the phase. Just, it's fine. It's totally fine as long as you live. Take a little bit of damage. I would also melee weave this boss. For Lorgus Jet, a huge amount of your damage can be from doing a little bit of AoE. That's from using grenades as well as multi-shots. So if you want to do a ton of damage, make sure you're always multi-shotting right off of cooldown. I would also melee weave this boss, but it can be a little bit hectic with the boss moving around a ton. Also, the only totem that you need to down here is the chain lightning totem. I wouldn't even send my pet on it. I would leave my pet on the boss if I trust my healers to keep my pet alive. Switch to the totem, then use multi-shot, because it will hit off of the totem and hit the totem itself and the boss for double the damage. So always try to do that. If you switch to the totem, make sure you have multi-shot ready. Use it there. It's the most effective. efficient way to use it. And from there, you're always melee weaving, but the fastest way to get onto the boss itself is always going to be to burn the Tide Priestesses. So all DPS in your group should always just focus the Tide Priestesses, and the other ad is pretty much just there for meleeing. If you are lucky, the best case situation would be if one of the murlocs was on you the entire time. So you never had to move to melee weave, because you can just melee the murloc without having to do any movement itself, and then you can keep shooting the boss. This is one of the few places where you can do this, and it is so incredibly nice. A sneaky cheat you can do before Twilight Lord Kelris is that these shadow mages before the boss, they actually do a mind control. And if you get mind controlled, your warlocks can put Curse of Recklessness up on you. This is a debuff, but it increases your attack power. Also, if you are melee weaving on Kelris, make sure that you position away from the rest of the ranged group, and try to track when the boss is sending people into the Shadow Realm so that you're not melee weaving as soon as he's about to do that, so you get sent down. You can get pretty close to this boss before pulling it, so always position as close as you possibly can, and then again, as always, open with that multi-shot into auto shot, then run in if you can to do your first melee weave. But again, if you're positioned a little bit far, you're gonna have to slowly move in towards the boss, and if you're doing that, that is a perfect time to dynamite if you're really far away from the boss itself. And make sure that you get dispels, because of the shadowy chains. If they go off, they slow you, which fully griefs your melee weaving. And on top of that, you can also FAP at 30% as he transitions into phase 2, so you never get slowed. But if you do get slowed, make sure you pray for a dispel. If you don't get dispelled, you are screwed. Akamai has a really large hitbox, so you don't need to melee weave if you don't want to, but it's something you can just get used to. Again, you are always going to open with the same opener and move in and always try to melee weave. You probably won't have Wind Fury up on yourself for most of this fight, and that's totally fine. In an ideal world, your tank will drop their stacks as soon as the boss is about to go immune. Something like 60 to 65% actually, because it takes like 10 seconds for the stacks to actually drop and the elemental to explode, like you'll see right here. As soon as the elementals explode, hit them with a dynamite and a multi-shot. You want to dynamite them to hit all of them, and a multi-shot. This will help you get some extra damage out, and you want them to be up the whole time that the boss is immune. And then as the boss transitions into the next phase, he is a lot larger, so his hitbox is a lot larger. Be aware of this. As you are melee weaving, you need to position further now, and I have a new ranged timer or a ranged checker that you guys can get in my Discord or !weak aura in my Twitch streams to figure out how to set that up. But that is the big difference. If you are targeted by the boss's beams at the end, I would actually ignore it. Personally, I would literally ignore it, and I would continue just pumping the boss because it's a DPS loss. And from there, good luck getting the crossbow. That is a full breakdown DPS guide for hunters this phase in Season of Discovery. I will always have as many updates as possible for the future phases, as well as I'm working on rogue and warrior guides right now. And as always, thank you guys so much for the support on the channel. We are on our way towards 100,000 subs, and as soon as we get that, we will do a huge giveaway, something like a PS5 or like 5 years game time or something like that. So make sure to subscribe to the channel, and thank you for the support of all of my channel members. I love you guys. I love you guys. I do. Yeah. I'll see you guys on the next one.